My name is Itoro Ezianaba. I work with Partnership for Justice. Partnership for Justice manages a sexual assault referral center known as the Mirabel Center. And the Mirabel Center is a safe place where we provide support services to survivors of rape and sexual violence. It's located at the Lagos State University Teaching Hospital, Ikeja, Lagos. Well, we all know that in the case of sexual intercourse, anybody above the age of 18 has to give consent before sexual intercourse can take place. In the case of a minor, you cannot give consent no matter the situation. However, consent can only be drawn when the person has a full capacity to give the consent and also withdraw it. For instance, someone that is intoxicated or drunk, that gave consent in that kind of situation, you cannot be said to have given consent because you do not have the capacity to give consent at that point. So anything that makes it difficult or impossible for one to give consent with the full knowledge of what you're going to engage in, that does not constitute consent. Like I said, a minor cannot give consent, no matter the situation. You cannot say a minor, lured me into sex, or he or she did anything, because statutorily, anybody below 18 cannot give consent. Anybody above 18 can give consent. But there are situations where it is impossible for one to give consent. For instance, somebody on sound mind cannot be said to give consent. Somebody that is intoxicated, like I said earlier, cannot be said to have given consent. So a person with a disability such that you are not fully in control of your senses and are in a capacity to understand what you're getting involved with cannot give consent. So the law provides specific guidelines as to what consent is and what consent is not. And that also means that even if I give consent at the beginning of the act, I am at liberty to withdraw that consent at any point in time. So it's not a given that because I agreed to it at the beginning, that I have to agree to it to the end. So no matter what happened, maybe you have undressed or maybe I have undressed, and then suddenly I remember, oh, my mom had always warned me about this, and I said, I don't want anymore. The fact that I had given consent at the beginning does not mean that I cannot withdraw that consent. And once I withdraw that consent, anything you do thereafter is without my consent. And I can give consent to a particular act. For instance, I can give consent to vaginal intercourse. That consent does not cover anal intercourse. So the fact that I gave you consent for vaginal intercourse does not mean that I can engage in anal intercourse with you. So I give consent for a particular act and not for everything. Once you go beyond what my consent was, then you're violating my rights, and so I have the right to withdraw the consent, and I can definitely withdraw that consent at any time. Consent can be withdrawn verbally. I can say no. Consent can also be withdrawn by my actions. I pause, I take a stop, I push you back. All this show that I'm not ready to go on, but most of the time it's no. And then we tell everybody no is no. The fact that I said yes at the beginning does not mean that I cannot say no subsequently. And so consent can be withdrawn both verbally and non-verbal by your actions or your disposition, or even your face. Your face changes, and then that also means I have withdrawn my consent, and you should respect that. Can a man rape his wife? It's interesting because I wrote an article and it was published in Vanguard newspapers about, if a man can rape his wife. And the response I got was, some were really quite funny, some were very serious, and some raised a lot of points that we need to really look at. But the fact remains that a man can rape his wife. In most cases where there are incidents of violence, where a woman suffers from domestic violence, maybe physical violence, or verbal violence, or psychological violence, there's usually an element of sexual violence as well. And sexual violence, which could be sexual intercourse without consent, constitutes rape. At the Mirabel Center, we have seen women that have come in to report about maybe domestic violence or sexual violence against their children. And they also tell their own stories and tell about how their husbands have been beating them up and, as a follow-up to that, raping them. So in fact, there are cases of husbands raping their wives. But the question we need to ask is, how does the law treat this kind of situation? Can a man rape his wife under the law? There are very strict conditions under which the law would accept that. But generally, the law in Lagos State, in Nigeria, does not accept the fact that a man can rape his wife, does not acknowledge that situation that we find as being very factual. So the law does not provide for that. Well, Lagos State government has taken the right steps to ensure that survivors of rape and sexual violence are provided the kind of support that they need. We have special courts that will deal with the matter to ensure that there's expedited judicial process. Lagos State government has set up the domestic and sexual violence response team, and it's not just setting it up, it is actually very much interested, and that is a key agency, if I could call it that, of the Lagos State government. So the governor has shown in all ways that sexual violence and rape will not be tolerated in Lagos State. So my appeal to survivors of rape is to speak out. Come out, seek help, because if you don't seek help, you internalize the trauma, and it's more dangerous in the long run. Don't forget that a survivor of rape lives with that incident for the rest of her life. She can overcome it, she can walk, go on with her normal life, but she doesn't forget it. So she needs to seek help in order to manage that. And then for the perpetrators, I'm sorry for you if you're a perpetrator or you're planning to be one, because the law will catch up with you. If you continue to do it, or you've been doing it, it's time to put a stop to it. And I'm saying this particularly because perpetrators are actually acquaintances, people that survivors know. Fathers, school bus drivers, school teachers, domestic servants, pastors, imams, whatever you are, put a stop to it, because it will catch you one day and you suffer the consequences of your action, which is life imprisonment in Nigeria. And to the society generally, speak out. Don't keep quiet. Rape thrives in silence. The one weapon that a perpetrator has against a survivor and against society is silence. So speak out. The moment you speak out, the survivor becomes empowered, and the perpetrator becomes disempowered. You will need to give back power to the survivor.